So one of the most popular football bets out there is an accumulator, or an ACCA as they seem to abbreviate it nowadays. You tend to see them promoted and mentioned all over the place.
Now there's even more to play for with Betfair's new ACCA Edge.
But there's something really important to understand about this type of bet, and that is that it makes an awful lot of money. Unfortunately not for you, for affiliates, for people promoting it, and for the bookmakers, sports books, and exchanges that actually promote this particular type of product. So it's important to understand that, but more importantly, how you can turn that in your favour. So you see football accumulators promoted on betting sites and particularly through social media, encouraging you to have a bet because after all, it's fantastic value. You could place £10 down and win a huge amount of money for a very small stake. But not only that, we're going to boost it by 33% this weekend. So let's examine the theory and how accumulators are constructed, because this is an important part of the lesson of learning how you can turn those odds to your favour. So let's do some really simple probability here. I promise to keep it really simple and not to freak you out, because it's important to understand how this works in the context of football accumulators when you're betting. It works on the same principle. In my hand I have a coin, and this is, let's see what happens when I toss this coin. It has ended up on heads. And as a consequence, we know that there's a 1 in 2 chance, because it could end up heads or tails. It ended up heads. That's one of 2 possible outcomes. It's a 1 in 2 chance. But what's the chance of getting 2 heads in a row? The next coin I toss, will it end up on heads? What's the chance of that occurring twice in a row? Well, it's quite simple. Mathematically, you do 2 multiplied by 2. There's a 4 to 1 chance. And you just keep on multiplying as you go further and further into that run, and that will give you the outcome, or the odds, or the chance of that occurring over a period of time. So we go from a 1 in 2 chance to a 1 in 4, to a 1 in 8, 1 in 16, 1 in 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, and so on. Basically, that curve sort of goes exponential at that point. And to get 20 coin tosses in a row would be about 1,000,000 to 1 shot. So 20 heads in a row is quite remote. But that's why that initial small stake makes so much money when you're doing football betting, because the same sort of principle applies to when you're doing that on football. But of course, the odds generally will probably not be heads or tails. It will be something slightly different. So let's have a dive and a look at exactly how that influences the outcome of any particular football accumulator that you place. So one Premier League weekend, I went on to a variety of websites just to find out how much I could earn if I put a £10 stake down on an accumulator. And I picked 5 matches that where I thought the teams were going to win. So rather than going in and placing a back bet on one team and a back bet on another and a back bet on another, I basically said, I'm going to place a back bet on each of these teams. And basically, if all of those end up as wins, then I will get a very large amount of money. So just how much money would I win for doing this? Well, I went on to the William Hill website, put £10 in, clicked on the results of 5 different teams in the Premier League. And they basically said that for a £10 stake, they would pay out over £3,500. What a fantastic payoff. And the way that they've worked that out is they basically said, you backed this team at 3.6, you backed this team at 5, you backed this team at 2.5, you backed this team at 2.7, and then you backed this team at 2.9. We've multiplied all of those together. That comes to 352 multiplied by your stake of £10. You're going to win £3,500. And that sounds absolutely fantastic. Well, it does until you start shopping around a bit and understanding what the true chance of this event occurring actually is. So returning over £3,500 for a £10 stake by just guessing the outcome of 5 matches sounds like a really good deal, until you start shopping around and looking at other sites, because different bookmakers offer slightly different prices on each of those individual matches. And as we've seen on the way it grows exponentially, that can massively affect what the potential payoff is on your accumulator. So I took my £10, I went to Ladbrokes and placed £10 on 5 football matches there, and they basically said that my payoff there would be over £4,200. And that was in comparison to the £3,500 I had with William Hill. Exactly the same bet on exactly the same matches, £700 difference in payoff. And unless if you've got £700 to throw away, there's really no reason why you would place that bet with William Hill and not with Ladbrokes. And it all revolves around that differential in odds on each of those individual matches. And if only you could find a way of understanding what the true odds are, you would be able to understand whether you've got a good bet or not. And the interesting thing is, there is actually a way of doing this. So if we're talking about market efficiency and pricing and the best odds available, you'll nearly always find these on a betting exchange, especially when we're talking about football. And one of the reasons that this occurs is because there are loads of people fighting to offer the best prices on the betting exchange, and therefore very little money is lost to the other side of the book. And therefore the price that you see is a fair reflection over the longer term of the odds that are available and the chance of something occurring within a football match. So we can use this to dive a little bit deeper and understand exactly what odds we should be getting on our accumulator. And it's quite easy to do that because we can basically bring up the markets on Betfair, have a look at all of the individual matches, plug them into a spreadsheet and actually calculate out what the real chance of this accumulator occurring actually is.
So we know that the Betfair exchange contains the best pricing and the most accurate pricing across the market. So what I did was I went on to the Betfair exchange, I looked at these individual matches, plugged the data into a spreadsheet, and this is what I found. So the first person that we visited was William Hill, and we did a 5-fold accumulator to a £10 stake, and the individual odds on those matches were as follows: 3.65, 2.5, 2.7 and 9. If we multiply them all together, that gives us 352. So we would win £3,524 on a £10 stake. But the problem is, if these are true odds, you can see that we're only ever going to win 0.28% of the time. So we're going to lose 99.72% of the time. You can see why bookmakers love accumulators, because generally you just lose money on them. But the interesting thing is the difference between this and true odds. And if we take the Ladbrokes pricing, we can perform the same sort of calculation on there, and that came out much higher, so we get a much bigger payoff. But again, the chance of you losing is still very, very high. But the most interesting thing is if we take the odds that we see on Betfair and multiply them together, they come out at odds of 580-ish. But you can see there that should return, our £10 stake should return somewhere near £6,000. But on William Hill, it's returning sort of almost half that. There's a £2,300 difference in payout. And even on the better prices at Ladbrokes, there's still a significant difference between the payout. So of course, this brings up the question of what exactly can you do about this?
So you can see that on the Betfair exchange, you have really, really good odds. So what's the solution to getting a much, much better price on there? Well, surely it must be to place your accumulator on the Betfair exchange. Now, the funny thing is, if you go on to the Betfair exchange, you look at all of these individual matches and all of these really crunchy odds, and then you go to place an accumulator on there, you'll find something interesting. And that is that there is no way of placing an accumulator. It basically refers you back to the Betfair Sportsbook. And guess what happens on the Betfair Sportsbook? Of course, you get duff pricing. You get accumulators that are wildly off from the true chance of it occurring, just the same as you would with any bookmaker or sportsbook. Now, many, many years ago, when I first started on the exchange, you could place accumulator bets. And every now and again, you will get accumulator bets on the exchange, but they're not heavily promoted. And you can sort of guess the reason why. It's because people lose accumulators all of the time. They're good margin makers for the individual sportsbooks or the bookmakers, and therefore they sort of don't want to give away that business, as it were. However, I have a really neat solution for you. So ultimately, the best solution would be if we could take those prices on the Betfair exchange and then multiply them up to much, much bigger numbers. That would be absolutely fantastic, because we know that those odds are pretty efficient and we know that the payoff would be absolutely huge. So in theory, you could sort of do this yourself manually. You could basically place one bet on one event, and then when that event wins, you just take that money plus the winnings and put it on the next event. However, that's quite a lot of hassle, really, isn't it? Having to manage and monitor your positions and so on from there. And wouldn't it be great if you could just sort of, I don't know, automate it? And that's exactly what we've done on BetAngel, because what you can do is we have a piece of automation that will actually carry forward and manage your stakes for you as each of these events unfold. Because the great thing about this is that you can basically take those really, really crunchy exchange prices, you can place a bet, and if it wins, it will carry it forward automatically to the next event and multiply it upwards. So you can actually finally, for the first time ever, get really good value accumulators and win potentially large amounts of money. And the way you do this is you would basically just plug in this piece of automation to BetAngel, you make the nominations of the selections that you're interested in, and then BetAngel will go off and do that for you. There are a number of caveats that you need to think about here, because BetAngel can't possibly know or manage positions on an event if they're occurring at exactly the same time. So, you know, one of the limitations that you have is you have to do it in events that will basically occur, settle, and then you can carry that money forward. So for example, doing 5 matches that kick off at 3 o'clock, you can't do, unfortunately. There's no way for us to be able to do that. However, you could do the 12:30 kickoff, the 1 o'clock kickoff, the 3, the 4:30, and then the 8 o'clock kickoff or something like that. But also, you know, you're not limited to one sport or one particular type of market. You can just mix and match things as you see fit. But also, you could actually stop it at any one particular point. If you didn't feel that you wanted to continue, you've got complete control over it. So you have a few limitations, but the big advantage is that you've got much more control over it. And of course, you will win much more money. We've got an example on the forum where you can basically just go in, download and plug that into BetAngel, and it can run all of that for you. But like I said, you know, run it in practice mode, because there are some caveats and limitations in there, or ask as many questions as you like and perhaps play with very low stakes when you first start using this. But what we've done here is we've created a way for you to grab all of that value that you see on an exchange and stick it in an accumulator. So let's quickly summarize this for you. Football accumulators are popular because you can place a small bet and win a large amount of money. However, if you place that with a traditional sportsbook or bookmaker, they love it because not only is the chance of you winning that bet very small, but they will get to keep a large chunk of that margin. And we know that because we went onto the Betfair exchange, we looked at the true prices in the market, we could calculate exactly what the chance of that accumulator coming in was, and also how much it should have won if it was placed at true odds. But accumulator bets are so profitable for bookmakers and sportsbook that you can't even place one on the Betfair exchange because they want to send you to the sportsbook where you run into exactly the same problem. However, because you can use bits of software like BetAngel on the exchange and you can automate your bets, a few caveats to be inserted here, but you can actually create an accumulator with a few restrictions. It's not going to be exactly the same as you'd get with a bookmaker. However, you can work around that and still get absolutely fantastic odds and a great chance of a decent payoff. So yeah, if you want to place a successful football accumulator bet, that's what you need to know, and that's how you would do it.